Hello and welcome to DCTV. Today we are talking with children's rights over flights, and I have Sarah O'Sullivan, Angela Deegan and Celestine O'Reilly with us to talk about their organisation, their campaigns and what they are organising and campaigning about. Hello to you all.
Hello.
Hello, Brian.
Just
Hi.
to start, because there's something happening in Dublin on June the 7th, is it? June the 7th
Six,
or June the
six
6th? June the
tomorrow.
6th, tomorrow. And what is it that's happening and why is it of interest to the people of Dublin? Who wants to take that?
I can take
Uh,
that.
yeah,
Oh, go ahead,
I,
Sarah. Go ahead.
I'll maybe chat a bit about tomorrow, and then I suppose Angela, you can flesh out the background a bit more. So there is a meeting happening in the DAA offices in Dublin Airport tomorrow, which is co-hosted between the DAA and an organisation called Chapter Zero Ireland, and they're an organisation, a member group for non-executive directors. And the idea of that group, it's an international group. This is the Irish chapter of it. The idea of that group, or the mission of that group, is to inform and educate and support non-executive directors to take climate action seriously from the boardroom. So it's a very significant piece of work to say, look, if we want climate action to happen in a real way in the corporate world, actually the non-executive directors need to be educated. And this particular meeting on Friday for members of that organization is to discuss, and we put inverted commas often when we talk about sustainability, but to talk about sustainability in aviation and transport. And our campaign group, which is called Children's Rights Over Flights, kind of says it in the name, want to draw attention to this event as greenwashing, because if they have a keynote speak, the keynote address is from Kenny Jacobs from DAA, who have been actively campaigning to lift the passenger cap at Dublin Airport, which is completely contrary to any ambition of reducing emissions. So for an organization like that, who are uh, very much driving the message that we need to grow flights, despite the fact that we can't. Internationally, it has been recognized there is no way to increase flight numbers and reduce emissions. Those two objectives are completely incompatible. So for an organization like Chapter Zero Ireland to have DAA as the keynote speaker on sustainability is total greenwashing, and we feel it's very hypocritical. So we want to highlight that and not let that narrative go unchecked.
Let's come back to some of those points in a short while, but maybe first to Angela. Can you tell us a bit about children's rights over flights?
Yeah, sure. So we're a grassroots, all volunteer group. We're parents, grandparents, and others who want to see children's rights prioritized over polluting flights. We believe that every sector needs to play its part in tackling climate change, including aviation, and that increasing flights is just reckless in the face of this climate crisis that we're in. So, and our objectives are to defend the rights of children in the context of the climate emergency by ensuring that the aviation industry does its fair share to protect them from climate harms, to increase awareness of the climate harms of aviation and to expose misinformation and to highlight real and false solutions to pollution from aviation. And then just quickly, we have six main goals. Number one is to keep and enforce the annual passenger cap of 32 million passengers at Dublin Airport, just as a first step towards the aviation industry in Ireland contributing to climate action. Number two, we want to see international as well as domestic aviation emissions included in the Irish government climate action plans and targets. And we want, number three, we want aviation public policy that's consistent with stable climate. And we want media coverage of the aviation sector to include discussion of the climate impacts of the sector. We want to end aviation advertising, promotion, and greenwash. So, hence our press release about tomorrow. And lastly, we want the Irish government advocating for the implementation of strong European and international measures to limit aviation impact on the climate. So that's our sort of mission, objectives, and goals overview.
And while I record, I can hear in my right ear the airplanes. I'm on the flight path, so to Dublin Airport, they're flying past me. Celestine, just coming back to something Angela said there, I'm going to ask and guess that you're intergenerational. You're kind of working on behalf of children, but maybe you're including them in the story, in the narrative, in the campaign about this issue.
Yes, well, the reason why we focus on children's rights, because it's a human right to have a livable planet, and like failing to address rising emissions is counter to that. And I'm neither a parent nor a grandparent, but I got involved with CROF because I was already trying to campaign about aviation, because the whole messaging around aviation, the fact that the government is actually trying to increase aviation, which is probably the most greenhouse gas emitting thing most Irish people do. And at the same time, they tell us they want to make sustainable choices. In fact, sustainable choices was kind of at the core of their climate action plan originally. But this messaging that fly more is what they're telling us. It just runs completely counter to that. And it destroys people's faith in the fact that the government are actually tackling climate change. How can they be tackling it when they're encouraging people to do the most greenhouse gas emission thing they can do? And then, I don't know if you saw the EPA report that came out yesterday, showing the climate impacts that are going to happen now in mid-century and at the end of the century. And mid-century, I mean, about 15 years away. And all those people who are the young people who are around now, what have they got ahead of them? You know, what are they going to look forward to? These catastrophes that could be coming down the road. And we really need urgent action, and fossil fuel burning is the most serious thing. The scientists say the thing we most need to stop as urgently as possible. And so the aviation really needs to be tackled.
Okay, coming back to Sarah and that allegation of greenwashing. So the event is talking about climate change, and one would think that that's a very positive thing, but we might be clever enough to guess that there's no new breakthrough in science that's allowing airplanes to fly on vegetable oil, that they're using the kerosene they've always used in the same way. So I wanted to kind of pose it that the Dublin Airport Authority, they're the people who tell us how long the security queues are, and they tell us about the busyness of the airport, maybe the taxi ranks, and they're a large employer in the Fingal area. Are they kind of on the wrong side of this story when it comes to climate change? And what could they do to get on the right side of the story?
Well, I think they're going to be on the wrong side of history. You know, people, they'll look back on this in as little as a decade's time and think, God, what were we doing? It was immoral to act in that way. And you know, I'm just the title of the event is Cleared for Clarity, Rethinking Aviation, Transport and Sustainability. And as far as we can make out, you know, we're not going to be in the room. We don't have all the details. You know, unfortunately, this is a member-only event. It's not a public event. So we can't say exactly what's going to be said. But what we do know is that in the room, there are no climate scientists, you know, in the list of speakers, no climate scientists, and nobody representing the alternative international travel, as in, sea transport, ferries. So for the DAA to be talking about sustainable travel without opening up that conversation is very disingenuous, really. And I think it's no coincidence that the CEO of the DAA is ex-Ryanair. You know, it's not really, it's a semi-state commercial entity. So it is, in a way, a public entity, even if it is supposed to be sort of self-sufficient in a commercial way. And it acts, I think it feels like they're acting like a private entity in the way that they focus on growth and not putting that in the context of the impacts that will have. So, for example, the passenger cap was originally put in place not for climate reasons. It's been there for a very long time. And it was because of lack of infrastructure, traffic congestion, you know, thinking about the local environment, not the broader picture of the environment. And we really haven't sorted any of those problems either. So even if you took the climate conversation out of it, it is difficult to see how the DAA could justify increasing the volume of traffic through the airport. As you point out, that there is often congestion in terms of the traffic through the airport, but actually the traffic in the area and the air pollution. So the today problems, the impacts on the human beings, as you mentioned there yourself, in the flight path, children's sleep being disrupted, air quality being compromised. So even those elements of the picture, really the DAA don't seem to be adequately, I think, taking that into consideration in how they're acting. I think that when they talk about growth and the necessity for the growth in numbers of flights into this country, they sort of forget about the flights out of the country. They're really, the economic argument doesn't stand up. Now, we're not economists, so I'm not going to, start spouting numbers. But from our research, we've seen things like Sally has found some great research talking about the net flow of funds when it comes to tourism. So, if there's more money being spent outside of the country by Irish people than the people who come into Ireland, then talking about damaging tourism is not a reasonable argument when increasing flights. When talking about employment, the country's at full employment. So this talk of we're keeping the cap is compromising employment is completely disingenuous. So look, it's about the broader picture. They're very much cherry picking in how they approach this conversation. So we as campaigners are just constantly trying to broaden out that conversation to cover all angles so that they can't hoodwink, whether it's the political people that they're lobbying or the general public through the media. We need to make sure that everybody has the full picture, not just the cherry-picked view of vested interests.
I was reading up about it, and even the cap itself at 32 million isn't 32 million because it doesn't include a lot of people who are sitting on aeroplanes. It doesn't include people passing through the airport. They're not counted. So if you're going on to New York from the Netherlands or something, you're not counted as a person coming through Dublin Airport in those numbers. There's a lot of groups involved in this. There's the airlines, obviously. There's the government. The county council are involved. And you mentioned that it was in place for other reasons. I remember it kind of from sound and audio kind of decibel levels and they put microphones down the road from me here in Baldoyle to capture those levels. And I thought Fingal were going to be in the courts about it as well. But anyway, the cap has been lifted. And what has happened is that more and more people are travelling through. And a week ago today, they had their biggest day in the history of Dublin Airport. And they had 124,000 people on one day go through. They had 250,000 across the weekend, the bank holiday weekend. And maybe that's a vision of what it's like without a cap, is it just keeps on rising and rising and there's no control on it. Does anybody have a kind of a take on that? Like, why shouldn't there be controls to say, like, could I own 11 cars and park them outside my house? Could I own 32 cars? Is there no limit on what I could? And in my case, it would be that excise duty on fuel would probably stop me having 32 cars on the road. But there's nothing like that stopping the airlines because they don't have any of those caps. What can curb them other than controls of numbers of passengers?
I would jump in there and say that we do consider this passenger cap quite sort of a crude tool for limiting, aviation. It's just that it's pretty much all we have. So let's keep what we have, but we would like to see, more sensible, science-aligned, limitations. One that comes to mind would be a limit on annual use of jet kerosene. So yeah, that's what I would say to that. And also, yeah, so just the cap is still in place. It's just that it's not being enforced at the moment. So yeah, so we would like to see the current cap kept and enforced. That's what we would like to see, while and also come up with better guardrails, if you like, to limit aviation so that it's in line with a livable planet for our kids, future generations.
It's well reported that the new government, they're in since November, are planning to legislate to remove this cap at Dublin Airport, and possibly for other airports if any caps were to exist in the future, that they want to just allow as many people come in as is possible. So maybe my question is that is it not better to maybe appeal to people who are taking the flights to fly less, or is that folly?
Well, I would say that yes, individual change is good, but we need systemic change. And I would say that, we're in a climate emergency, but the government isn't treating it at all as a climate emergency. Compared, for instance, with the COVID emergency, there were great public. I wasn't actually living in this country at that time, but I understand the government, handled it really quite well in terms of public service announcements and making sure the public knew what needed to be done. So, yeah, I think we're really lacking in this climate emergency actions that are consistent, actions from the government and statements from the government that are consistent with us being in a climate emergency. So yeah, we're not getting, the public isn't getting communications from the government as to what we need to be doing. And I think a lot of people are just going around thinking, well, the government's taking care of it. It's all being handled. Well, it's not being handled. And a big part of it is the relentless, advertising of flights and flight-based holidays and the like. And recently, we've had calls for, an end to fossil fuel advertising, including from a group called Irish Doctors for the Environment, who had a quote in our press release. So advertising sort of normalizes behaviors, and some of those behaviors are, not in our interests whatsoever, and especially not in the interests of our children and future generations. We simply cannot continue to increase aviation. I think people forget we're on a finite planet, and we just can't keep, growing and growing. So,
I think a good sort of analogy of the difference between behavioral change that can just happen or is enforced, is if you look at the change in approach to smoking in this country, for example, it would be nice if the best choice was the easiest and the cheapest choice, right? So at the moment, if you go to get a packet of cigarettes, the advertising is not there. So there's plain packaging. There's no ads in your face all the time, especially something addictive like smoke, it's a reminder, go get a smoke, go to smoke, that's gone. You have to go up to the counter. You have to, it's made a little bit harder for you. It's made a lot more expensive for you. So the whole narrative around smoking is it's a bad idea. Nobody stops smoking just because somebody says, don't do that. It's because it's not the right thing to do. Like, it just doesn't work. As much as we would love to think people make choices based on ethics and morals and it being the right choice, that's not how the real world works. So, we're pragmatic about that. We understand that. And therefore, all of those elements need to come into play. For example, stop subsidizing flight. If flight fuel was really as expensive as it should be, then flights couldn't be so cheap. Like, I'm just back from a ferry trip for a weekend, and the ferry was probably around the same price as flying, if not more expensive. And that's ridiculous. We just the system needs to make flying as expensive as it should be, and just make the right choice easier for consumers, because that's the only way people can be supported to make better choices.
And maybe it is that advertising that will bring us to a point where people morally understand their involvement in this story. So I have a big question, which has probably got a very short answer, but you could probably all answer it. So the first to shout it in and shout over each other. But it's a long question with a short answer. So if I go to fill up my car with petrol, it's 179 cents a litre. And what the tax on that is 60 cent on excise duty, 13 cent on carbon tax, 2 cent on a NORA tax, and 1 cent on a better energy tax, amounting to 101 cent of tax on a 179 litre. So that's like more than half is tax. 60% is tax. How much tax is there on kerosene jet fuel?
As far as I know, it's zero.
Zero. And okay, and this came
like
up.
the lead cert.
Yeah, it came up in the last answer. So why are they getting this big leg up from the European Union through a directive, and then the national governments are allowing this to happen? Why, if we're going to get to talk about us not hitting our carbon emission targets and all that kind of stuff, why are they being allowed? It's 500 million a year they're being gifted every year. Ryanair only make 1.6 billion after tax profit. So 1/3 of that they're being gifted to the whole Irish industry. Why is that being allowed to happen? Like, you guys are in this story. You must know how they've got. Have they got a very good lobbying? Are they well connected?
The influence and how these maybe decisions, historic decisions being maintained. All you need to do is watch the news or pick up a paper to see the column inches that Michael O'Leary gets. Like, who's Michael O'Leary? He's a billionaire with a big mouth, and he is only interested in profits. So why do we see images on the news of him walking out of the Oireachtas again? Who's he chatting to? Why is he an advisor, a voice in the room when decisions are being made? That's kind of the bigger picture of, and another reason why children's rights over flights exist, because we felt that there seems to be no end in the media's appetite to listen to Michael O'Leary. And the likes of, say, the Business Post, for example, have seemed to increase the number of column inches and just repeat what he and other similar people are saying. Their press releases just seem to get printed. So that kind of influence from the general public through the media, but certainly at a political level, feels really wrong to me and to us, I think. And it's really important that concerned citizens speak up and help each other speak up. And we'll talk about how you can join our campaign and support our campaign, because we need to be louder as concerned citizens, because the people who have a lot of money in their back pocket and a big marketing team and they can be in all places. They're stronger than us at the moment, and we need to really work on that.
So Fiscal Advisory Council and the Climate Change Advisory Council together in March released information that says we're not going to hit our targets for 2030, the carbon targets, and that this is going to cost us 8 to 23 billion euro. And that was before May 25th, when the EPA told us that we are going to miss it, and we're going backwards at the moment in terms of hitting those targets. We're going to miss it, I calculate, by about 28%. And they're going backwards this year instead of going forwards to. This is where they set some levels in 2005, and we're trying to get to 51% of the 2005 targets. If the writing is on the wall, George Lee is on RTE News twice a week telling us these shocking numbers, shocking stories about the direction of travel. So flying shouldn't cost the earth. Is the earth the price we're paying for cheap flights? Anybody?
Well, I think that's a rhetorical question.
And certainly the answer is yes.
Is the answer go sign your petition?
That would be one of the answers, yes, absolutely. So we have a petition to keep the passenger cap, which is on our website, children'srightsoverflights.ie, and it's plainly visible there.
What other things do you do as an organisation to advance this conversation and reach the families of Ireland, if not the politicians of Ireland?
Well, just bearing in mind that we are just a small volunteer group with no funding really. So yes, we have showed up to various conferences, and at least 2 occasions we've managed to get some media that was there anyway, and we were standing outside, so they talked to us, and we've managed to get on the news a couple of times. So trying to get in the media, And yes, as I think you alluded to earlier, one of our members was on the Katie Hannon's show. The name of it escapes me at the moment. Upfront, thank you. Yeah, so we're just trying to counter narratives in the media as much as we can. And we have actually asked for a meeting with Minister Darragh O'Brien, but we have not heard back, because we know that we read an article in the paper that he was meeting with various stakeholders. And in the coming weeks, this was about 6 weeks ago. So we're like, well, we're stakeholders. And so we wrote to him almost right away saying, well, we'd like you to meet with us. And so far we haven't had an offer of a meeting. So, but yes, we do meet with elected officials, where we think it can further our goals of our campaign. And yeah, we were recently at the Mary Robinson Climate and Nature Conference, where we had a stall there to engage with people and gather signatures for our petition. So yeah, so that's the kind of stuff we've been engaging in.
I'm going to pose a question and a solution, possibly. That there's a disconnect between taking the flights, or maybe flying more than one time a year, or flying too often as individuals, to what's happening down on the ground vis-a-vis flooding. So maybe the next time Middleton or Bantry or Clontarf floods, and they will because of their low-lying positions and the rising seas and the weather patterns and climate change that we're having, it will happen. These places will flood. That maybe iconography or images of airplanes are put at the site of the crime where the water has flooded the town, to say this is cause and causation, and this is where it comes from.
But by then, Brian, it's too late, because once you get that far, it's now that action needs to be taken. We don't want to wait until the world is in flames before we're flooded, before we start reducing our emissions. And this is why, with children's rights over flights, we try to concentrate on the right of our children. And the climate crisis is a human rights crisis. And this is the angle that we want to focus on, because it's what we do here and now that's going to impact our children and young people today. And looking at the EPA report that came out yesterday, I mean, I don't know if I'm really old, I'll still even be around myself to see some catastrophic effects from climate.
Let me ask you then, because children is in your name, children's rights over flights. Are the children themselves more impatient than maybe our age group? Are they showing a lead in terms of being impatient about solutions to this?
I think some are, but because originally, when Greta Thunberg started out, she was a fantastic leader for children. But all the children who were led by her and went out protesting back then, nothing happened on foot of their protests. They were given a lot of applause-mossing and nothing happened, which, it sends them the message that they're protesting. It's pointless. But I myself have met many young people who are really anxious and fearful about the future. And I really feel for them. And that's the thing that motivates me. And that's why I'm involved with children's rights over flights. It's not up to them. They're only kids. Kids should be allowed to be kids. They follow our lead, whether we think so or not. So I don't think we should push children to be responsible for this themselves. It's not fair.
Yeah, back about 9 years ago, when they were striking on Fridays for, coming out of school, taking that lead from Greta Thunberg, there was a political wave of elections of Greene candidates across Europe and then in national parliaments 8 and 9 years ago. And that's waned since then in terms of the political cycles that happen. Is there a place to be looking other than European and national parliaments in terms of where people civically can come together and do something about this? Like, where is the go-to public square for people, the town hall, to have this conversation and to grow your campaign and many others like it?
Well, go ahead.
Go ahead. I was just going to say, sorry, that's a really good question, Brian, because there are many, many groups around the country who are campaigning on the platform for climate change, and they are fairly disparate. So, sorry, Angela, you go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, well, I think opportunities like the one you're affording us today, I would like to see more of the media platforming, groups like ours, and giving us a voice rather than, as Sarah mentioned, the Business Post platforming and just seeming to be a mouthpiece for, Michael O'Leary and a lot of his non-science-based opinions. So yeah, it would be great to see the media. I mean, the climate crisis affects every aspect of our lives, and we need climate reporting infused in every aspect of reporting, pretty much. But we're not really seeing that, and yeah, so that's
another question for you then, in regard to maybe where we could take the campaign. Just over 10 years ago, 11 years ago, the marriage equality campaign was at a stage where they had a video that said Sinead's hand. And there was a video where they were going to every door in Ireland and they were asking for permission, about marrying Sinead. And the point they were making was we shouldn't have to go to every door in Ireland and ask for permission to marry Sinead. And then they had a citizens' assembly, and then they had an idea to come up with a referendum. The referendum happened 10 years ago, and the rest is history. Is there anything to be said for, citizens' assembly approach that, to influence a big... I know there's an urgency about it, but it's also a huge problem that nobody's paying attention to. Is there something to maybe go into that kind of forum to get the politicians to give a citizens' assembly and have 100 people tease out the issues?
That's always helpful, because one of the things that citizen assembly can do is give our politicians permission to do something, because they often fear...
Because they're too frightened to do it themselves.
Pardon?
Because they're too chicken to do it themselves.
Well, I wouldn't say that now myself, but it gives them the confidence to do it, because if the citizens' assembly is asked for, there's a chance it might work. I mean, politicians, a lot of them are very cautious by nature, and this would help guide them in the right direction. That's
same question to Angela. Do you think there's something in that or something similar?
Yeah, I would definitely, think citizens' assembly is a great idea. But I just think we need more people in this country to take a more active role in civics, and not just to assume that the government is going to take care of everything without us making demands. I mean, they will. I believe, my understanding is that polls are showing that Irish people really are concerned about the climate crisis, but we have to, keep at our elected officials and, translate that concern into demands that we make of them, specific demands, like, for instance, keeping the passenger cap and addressing emissions from aviation. And there are many more, of course, in other areas in other sectors, but as far as aviation, people need to get in touch with their elected officials and make known to them what's important to them, because politicians will not act unless they feel they have the support. And I think it's really critical for everybody who cares about their children and future generations.
One of the other things I read was that the emissions from the flights over Ireland is equivalent to 1.6 million cars emissions in a year, like for like. It will be nigh on impossible to take 1.6 million cars off the road. With the flights, do you think it's an easier thing to regulate, that we can reduce? And where's the alternatives then for travel? Is it the ferry, as Sarah was saying? Is there other ways off the island other than flying?
Well, I think maybe we need to reframe things a little bit, and I think Sally will probably have something to say on this as well. But certainly when I was growing up, I think I was 16 when I took my first flight, and norms were very different back then. And I think we need to start looking more holistically at things, and asking ourselves, what do we need for, to be well, for people's well-being? Do we really need, multiple city breaks a year that involve flying in order to have a good rounded life? I mean, the basics of life are, having food, shelter, and people we love around us. And those things will not be available to people in the future. There's going to be massive food shortages, and we're going to have major refugee crises, all because of the climate crisis. So I think we need to really take a step back and, like I said, look at this more holistically. And also, I would bring in the question or the issue of climate justice. Something that I learned only about a year ago is that in any given year, only about 6% of people in the world fly, and only about 20% of the world's population has ever flown. So it's a real. We should be looking at it at flying as a privilege, and not take it for granted that we, not just assume that it's okay to be flying multiple times a year. I think we need to each, think seriously about this, and
a privilege versus a right.
Yeah, I mean, it's not something that we require for our survival. Obviously, it's a bit different if you have. I would probably make a distinction, if people have, family abroad, that might be could look at that a little differently. But and perhaps some flights for holidays are okay. But I just think we need to sort of reframe flying and really take a good hard look at it. At least certainly until it becomes within. Perhaps at some point it will be a lot more sustainable, but certainly now there's no path forward to aviation becoming sustainable in the very near future.
You mentioned go ahead.
Right, Brian, I'd like to say there, your remark about people getting off the island. This is a strange kind of narrative that there isn't only since the Celtic Tiger. It's as if we can't bear to stay here, and we got to travel abroad several times a year for the sake of our sanity. But yeah, I mean, to me, like, for example, that book of Tomás O'Crohan, The Island Man, when the people from the Blasket Islands got off the island, or friends who live on Inisheer get off the island, like, they go mad. That's people getting off an island. It's not people leaving a big state like Ireland, one of the richest countries in the world. Why should we have to escape it as many times a year as possible? Like, that whole narrative, I just don't buy it.
When Angela said how old she was when she first took a flight, I had to then check myself and say, how old was I? And then it hit me that I was 30 years ago yesterday. That means I was 25. And I know it was 30 years ago yesterday because I was in the Isle of Man, and it was my first flight, and I flew on a little Air Aran thing over there. And it was the weekend of Riverdance being the interval act in the Eurovision. And it was 30 years ago yesterday. So that's how old I was. How old were you, Celestine, when you first flew?
17, actually. I went off as an au pair to Belgium. But that's another thing. I don't think you need to travel to broaden your mind. I mean, I stopped flying a good number of years ago, and I don't feel I'm in any way narrow-minded or missing out on account of it. I mean, a week on a beach somewhere isn't going to expand my mind, I don't think.
And just to say that before I was in the Isle of Man, I had been in Italy twice, but I went there on train and boat there and back the whole journey twice. So it can be done. And maybe, is there anything to be said, and maybe finish up on this, that conversations about our travel and our travel habits might be where it starts, that we take. I travelled to Italy and Malta twice in 4 months in 2018. And I felt that is way too much. That is ridiculous. And it's because I could get a bus to Belfast for a tenner and fly there for 150 quid. And that was the Malta trip. And you could go even cheaper on Ryanair to Bari and buy it at the last minute. It's very easy. It's very cheap. It's very discounted by what we were talking about, the fuel stuff. Should it start with conversations of how old were we when we had our first flight? What, is our feelings about flying and what it's doing to the environment?
Yes, there isn't enough conversation about it. It's because everyone around you is flying. It's just taken for granted. It's a thing to do. It's an okay thing to do. In all conversations where there are groups of people, you hear people talking about their latest trip somewhere or where they're planning to go. And it's just become like a social norm. It's socially acceptable that we do this. But to kind of introduce the idea that it's not, it's not the be all and end all. It's not good for the planet. It's not good for us. There's very little talk about this. And I think the passenger cap is one of the things at the very core of this, how the government is actually encouraging people to fly more. And people believe that the government are looking after us and that they're tackling climate and we don't need to worry. And then they're sending this message, you can burn fossil fuels. We think it's okay. And so we follow their lead and we think it's okay. So, I mean, when it comes to conversations, that's a good thing. But I also think the government really needs to regulate around this a bit. And the passenger cap is one way where they can be seen to give us the message that, hey, folks, maybe you shouldn't be flying here, there and everywhere. At the drop of a hat, maybe it's not the best thing to do. I mean, I think that would be the best start as regards messaging and what people feel and think about it. Our leaders leading. That's what we need.
If I go back 35 years ago to my first job in an office, I was working in an office in Georgian Dublin on the 4th floor, and there was 4 people in the office with me, and I was the young new entrant into the office world. And I was able to and allowed to and did smoke in the office. And if we think back on that now, it's abhorrent. It's like, how, why? The other people didn't smoke, by the way, and it was completely okay. And we smoked on airplanes way back then. I wasn't on the airplanes, but I see them in pictures. So things change, laws change. You ban smoking in offices, in workplaces, in pubs eventually, and we were the first in the world to do that. Could we be the first in the world to bring in something similar for aviation?
Yes, we could. The only barrier is the courage of our leaders, I believe.
So let's
are our leaders willing to truly lead and to actually mitigate, climate emissions? At the moment, it doesn't appear that they are.
If we look to who gave them the courage to do the plastic bag ban and the cigarettes at the workplace and tobacco, maybe we can see where that courage was given to them. And we could help that by signing your petition, which tell us where that is.
It's on our website, childrensrightsoverflights.ie, and you will see.
And the petition is gathering momentum, and eventually it'll be sent to the politicians, is it?
Yes, to the politicians, yeah.
And that might give them some courage.
Yes, it's one way we can hopefully build that courage in our politicians.
Is there anything we haven't covered? Is there anything else you'd like to say before we sign off? We lost Sarah, by the way.
Yeah, I'm afraid she had to leave. I'm sorry. I should have let you know earlier. Yeah, actually, there's a statement that we had in a blog. I'm not sure if it's if one of our members came up with this herself or if it's from a different source, but I might just read this out if you don't mind.
Okay.
And one thing I didn't mention is that I talked about climate justice there a little bit in terms of aviation, and there's a statistic I wanted to mention in relation to that the average person in Uganda is responsible for just 1.1 tons of greenhouse gas emissions in a year. so 1.1 tons. But to contrast, a return transatlantic flight is equivalent to per passenger is equivalent to 3.2 tons of CO2 per passenger. So that just gives you gives people just some perspective on that. And then so this text I was talking about, our children's right to a livable future is being sacrificed to allow a minority of people to fly, an even smaller minority to fly frequently, an even smaller minority to live a private jet lifestyle, and an even smaller minority again to maximize profits and wealth through the aviation industry. And I just think that's quite a powerful statement.
And while we've been talking, aeroplanes have been landing and taking off at Dublin Airport. We were going to jump in and have a look at them, see if we can bring that up on the screen for you now. Is that on the screens now?
I think it's
so
coming.
There's flights coming into Dublin Airport and leaving, and flights over Dublin that are going off to London and Glasgow and Holland and all sorts of places. So it's over our heads. It's among us all the time. It's a topic we need to maybe strike up that conversation with our friends, family, neighbours, and talk to them over the fence and across the road and in the schoolyard, and ask them about what they think about this. We don't want to be maybe preaching or telling them, but information has been exchanged in this conversation here today. It's just information. It's not like telling them you must do this or you must do that. It's just tell them the damage that's happening. They'll come to the realization themselves of how serious it is.
Yeah, I think possibly, I think a video will be available of this interview. So I think if people could share this, and just to say, like, we're not Luddites. We're not against aviation for the sake of being, we're not anti-aviation. We just want to see it be within planetary boundaries and not contributing to climate collapse. So yeah, I just wanted to make that point. But but I think if people could share our petition, because there is a danger that if you talk to people sometimes one-on-one, you might come across as what is the term I'm looking for? We don't want to
nagging Nelly.
Yeah, I don't think that's very helpful. So I think allowing people to come across or to sharing information via articles or interviews, and that's why the media is so important. I think that's really important, and getting in touch with your elected officials about this issue too.
Final shout for that website.
children'srightsoverflights.ie.
Brilliant.
We're also on social media, Blue Sky and Mastodon and Facebook and LinkedIn as of yesterday.
Celestine O'Reilly and Angela Deegan and belatedly Sarah O'Sullivan, thank you very much for joining DCTV today and for discussing what your organisation are about and what you're doing, and more power to your campaign. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you for the opportunity. Bye now.